this ticket, this election means that people actually care. I did a small essay for Teen Vogue, and I said in that essay, like, vote because these people care. Vote because the people that we have in our current administration are morally incompetent and just don't care. They don't have a moral compass. They don't care about anyone or anything else but themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Wagner. I'm the editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue, and I am very excited and thrilled and honored to be able to talk with an amazing panel today. We're going to talk about all things about the economy and student debt and all the issues that really matter to all of us very deeply. And so I'm very excited to welcome our panel of Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, civil rights activist and organizer Nupol Kiazolu, activist and social impact strategist Jamira Burley, and wonderful actress Storm Reid. Congresswoman, I think you were going to say some remarks and then we can get started with some questions.
I would love for us to just get right into it. I'll just say, I appreciate the opportunity to be at this virtual table with all of you at a time of such inflection and crossroads for our country, where we find ourselves bearing the weight of three crises. A national reckoning on racial injustice, economic inequality, which is certainly not new, but has been exacerbated under this administration, and a global pandemic. And so we find ourselves in unprecedented times, which really demand of us unprecedented organizing, unprecedented mobilizing, unprecedented community. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be in community with all of you today.
Let's get into our first theme. We're going to talk about racial justice. And I would love to hear from everyone of just your involvement in the Black Lives Matter protests this summer, and how have you, continued to keep that energy up on your own platform with your own community, even though, mass demonstrations have really slowed down.
Hey everyone, I'm Nupol. I've been an activist and organizer since the age of 12 years old. So I'm definitely not new to the organizing scene. And in terms of the racial uprising that has taken place this summer and this new movement that has emerged, I've definitely have had an active role in it. I've organized tons of protests, led thousands of people on the front lines towards Black liberation and equality. And I will definitely say that my experience on the front lines has been nothing short of rewarding, in terms of seeing so many people from all walks of life come together in the name of Black liberation. But I'd be remiss to say if I didn't mention the brutality that I faced on the front lines and other unarmed, nonviolent protesters by agitators and police. So yeah, like, this movement definitely is rewarding in the sense of community, but we also have to recognize the things that we are facing and the systems that we're going up against every single day.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, and thank you, Nupol, for setting the stage. I think what we're seeing around the country is indicative to so many issues that have been plaguing the Black community for generations. Like Nupol, I started getting engaged when I was in my teenage years, back when talking about gun violence and criminal justice reform wasn't a sexy topic, or being an activist wasn't seen as something desirable. And over the last few years, and even in the last few months, we've seen a surge of so many new voices, so particularly Black women who have put their bodies and their lives at the forefront of change. And so over the last few months, I've been able to participate in many of the marches here in New York, many of them organized by the Freedom March, an organization led by two Gen Z Black youth. And in addition to that, I've been able to take my advocacy into the workspace. I work with a lot of brands and organizations who are trying to engage impacted communities. And I think trying to get them to understand that Black youth, Black experiences, Black death are beyond just numbers and individuals, but is indicative of how society has failed the Black community for so long, and we need transformative change.
Absolutely. I mean, I can agree with what both those two amazing ladies said. For me, as a 17-year-old young Black woman, a 17-year-old, just young person, I've been just trying to figure out what it means to be a civically engaged human. And I don't like calling myself an activist because I'm not. I am not on the front lines every day. I'm not organizing. So while I did attend a protest this summer, I feel like for me, I've been really just trying to figure out how I could lend my platform to the people who are on the front lines, the people who are really doing the work. Like, yes, I am donating. I am trying to get resources out there. I am trying to attend protests, and I'm trying to have conversations like this to where I can stay informed and in turn inform my supporters, my peers, my family, my friends. But also, I think it's important to lend my platform to people who are really doing the work, like I said. Like, I've been in communication with Miss Patrice, who is the co-founder of the Black Lives Movement. I think it's just important that if you are not on the front lines, like I'm not, like I said, I will say it again, it's important to really do your homework, really educate yourself, and really try to surround yourself with people who are doing those things.
Let me get in on this for a moment, because I can't let Storm give short shrift to her activism. You know, everyone has a role to play in the movement. And I think that because of the gravity of our challenges and the depth of our hurt and our trauma, everything seems so awesome in scope that if you're not doing everything, you think you're doing nothing. You know, you are a co-conspirator in the movement when you are intentional about the roles you play, about how you use your platform. You know, one of my favorite quotes from D. Ray McKesson is that, you know, the marginalized and oppressed are not voiceless. What we are is unheard. So when you are creating more space for more voices to be heard, that is the movement. And so I just want everyone to recognize that some people are going to pick up a bullhorn. Some people are going to pick up a mic. Some people are going to spit a rhyme, or write a poem, or sing a freedom song, or pack a lunch, or lead the front line. But we all have a role to play. And, you know, Storm, Lindsay, Nupol, Jamira, you know, and I seek to honor the tradition that Black women have played throughout history as the architects of movements, as the foot soldiers of movements, as the truth tellers, as the justice seekers, as the preservers of democracy. And that is what we are doing now. It is not a mistake that the Black Lives Matter movement was created by Black, queer, and trans women. You know, that is very much honoring the role that we have played throughout history. And so I'll just say, what I'm encouraged by is the sustainability of this movement. And that also that now we are talking about policy, because please do bear in mind that the disproportionate hate, hurt, and harm that Black Americans have experienced was not naturally occurring. It was legislated. And that is exactly why I also support the movement for Black Lives, the Breathe Act, because if we can legislate hate, hurt, and harm, then we can legislate equity, healing, and justice.
Absolutely. I think we should all snap.
Yes.
Collectively snap. Thank you, Congresswoman. And I mean, everything that you all said, 100% on point. And I think that we're all just trying to, you know, as we gear up and count down to this election, figure out how do we continue to push, how do we continue to use our voices. And speaking of this election, you know, what kind of change do you all see that the Biden-Harris ticket represents when we talk about systematic racism in this country, and what does that look like, you know, as for racial justice on that ticket?
I guess for me, this ticket represents for me, I can't speak for everybody, but for me and my friends and the people I have talked about this election with, this election means that people actually care. I did a small essay for Teen Vogue, and I said in that essay, like, vote because these people care. Vote because the people that we have in our current administration are morally incompetent and just don't care. They don't have a moral compass. They don't care about anyone or anything else but themselves. And I already know, and I have seen through the debates and conversations that I've had, that Joe Biden and Kamala, like, they care and they want to make a change. And I know that I would be naive to say, like, they're going to do everything perfect. They're going to say everything perfect. That's just not life. That's not how life works. But I do think they will make an effort to really try to turn things around and make sure everyone feels seen and heard and represented, and try to restructure this system that for the last 4 years has been continued to be built off our pain and oppression, and tried to continue to disproportionately keep us down. I don't think that this ticket and Joe Biden and Miss Kamala will do that, honestly.
You know, this election has been hard, especially for folks who saw the transition of what happened in 2008, and how we felt like as a country we've moved in a new direction. And I think this ticket particularly represents a moment of pause and reflection on not only what's currently being done wrong in this country, but the past deeds that have continued to push Black and Brown communities down. And so I do think that this ticket represents an opportunity for us all to reimagine what justice, what opportunity, what communities can look like when we all have so many voices and perspectives at the table who can provide texture to real world issues and situations that are happening in our communities and in our country. So I do think this is a move in the right direction. And to Storm's point, you know, everything is not going to be solved overnight. And the responsibility isn't even just up to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It also requires each and every one of us to do our part and to hold them accountable and to bring grand ideas to the table. So, you know, it's a partnership, and I'm looking forward to the partnership that can be developed when we have someone in office who actually want to listen to people, who believes in science and who believes that Black lives do matter.
Just to quickly follow up on what Storm and Jamira said, that was very powerful. I'd also like to add, for me, that this definitely represents justice and a moment of reckoning within our country. And we're coming to terms with who America has always been. Because every time, you know, a moment of racial tensions boil over and something tragic happens, this country and so many people always say, this is not who we are. But I always argue, this is exactly who America is and has always been. And now we are finally coming to terms with that. And I just want to make space for the Black organizers that have been on the front lines, especially young Black people that have been leading this fight towards racial equity in this country. And I've really charged elected officials to the task of really fulfilling what you were sworn in to do and who you are representing. And like, Gen Z is no longer sitting back and waiting for change to happen. We are demanding it. And what we're saying to elected officials is, if you are not serving the people and doing what you were sworn to do, then we will vote you out of office and we will put somebody in there that actually cares about what we're doing. And as everyone has stated before, voting is just the first step. We have so much more work to do. Show up to these elected officials' offices if you feel like they're not doing what they're supposed to do. Hell, I got arrested for pulling up on Daniel Cameron's lawn and non-violently sitting there demanding justice for Breonna Taylor. So it's like, listen, like, we really have to create a community where accountability and transparency is truly practiced and uplifted. And I believe that this election really represents where we're going to move forward in this country. And quite frankly, it's going to determine the trajectory of our country moving forward for like the next 20 years. So we really have to show up.
I will just say, you know, I have an ache in my heart for the where we find ourselves as a country. I have an ache in my heart, but I have a smile on my face and some joy in my spirit, which is what I always have when I get to be fortified by brilliant, dynamic sisters like you. I mean, I know I'm supposed to be, you know, stoic faced while I'm listening to these very hard truths, but I am so inspired by all of you, so grateful for you. I did just want to building on some of what all of you have said, what we say in Congress is, I associate myself with the comments of my colleague. So I associate myself with what you've already said, but just adding on to that, look, Black Lives Matter, and I want to take a moment to say this movement is global, and we stand in solidarity with Nigerians right now in the midst of these uprisings and this unrest. So this is a global movement. And Donald Trump has completely compromised our standing on the world stage. He has alienated allies. He has befriended our enemies. He has endorsed disinformation campaigns. So he is quite literally a threat to free and fair elections. So our democracy is on the ballot. And not only does he not denounce white supremacists, he emboldens them. So the contrast is very stark. Someone who emboldens white supremacy versus someone that can stand on a stage and affirm that my life matters. And Black lives matter. And that means that policies that are specific and precise in our healing and in equity and in justice, those matter. And we don't elect saviors, as Stacey Abrams, to bring another Black woman into the room, said, we elect partners. And so I don't know that everything I want is going to be accomplished under a Biden-Harris administration, but I know nothing I want is going to be accomplished under a Trump administration. And so far as Black folks are concerned with this pandemic, which his willful criminality and science denials and sluggish response has allowed to rage and to disproportionately impact our families and our communities, I know that we cannot forget 4 years. Black folks can't afford 4 more minutes of this administration. And what I know with certainty is that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will not operate with a cavalier attitude about human life. They will not operate with callous disregard about my life. And so healthcare is on the ballot. Democracy is on the ballot. Justice is on the ballot. Electing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is the door. It is not the destination. And I want to acknowledge this Black woman on this ticket, okay? Because we just celebrated or acknowledged the centennial of the 19th Amendment, women earning the right to vote. Black women were allies in that fight, but we did not receive our right to vote, earn our right to vote till 55 years later. Black women and people of color. So we have so often been the allies in the emancipation and the liberation of everyone else, even when that same grace has not been extended to us. So to have a Black woman, I tweeted the other day, imagine a world with a vice president that actually knows what a uterine fibroid is and wants to do something about it. If you don't think that matters, you don't know the struggle. I'm the oldest one here, so I live it. Okay.
I was about to Google it. I'm joking. I know what it is.
Yeah, Black women disproportionately separate from those things, but I'm just saying that she's put forward legislation to address those things. You know, it's important that people can name your pain, and they can't name it if they've never seen it, if they don't experience it. So we'll have that.
If they don't care. I mean, Jamira was talking about, obviously it's funny, but not funny how Trump just doesn't believe in science and doesn't believe in climate change and all of these things that we know very to be, important to the fabric of our livelihood. And so even when we talk about, climate change, I think that communication has gotten a lot better over the last couple of years. I think that people understand that we only have this planet, that we have to take this very seriously. But I think that people are just now understanding how this needs to be an intersectional conversation, one that, affects women of color and immigrants and, BIPOC people more than ever. And I'd love to hear you all's thoughts on this and dive a little bit deeper into your thoughts on, how climate change affects marginalized populations and what we can do to continue to elevate this as an issue that everyone needs to get on board with.
It's so funny. I was just on a panel with women of color talking about climate change, and I'm not a climate change expert, but one thing I know is that issues knows no knowledge, right? It transcends communities, borders, and cultures. And what we do know to be true about science is that science is always right. And in this case, we know that we are destroying our planet. Literally and figuratively, America and the rest of the world is burning, and we're losing so much of our natural resources because of the incompetence of leaders who don't want to believe the experts who have the job that they have because they've actually studied and have the knowledge to be able to back up the information that they do. And I say that to say that as someone who's worked specifically exclusively for marginalized communities, we know that climate change issues largely impacts those communities in so many different ways, right? From the increased epidemic of Black youth having asthma, right? Something that we normally don't associate with climate change, to being in communities where toxic waste is destroyed or thrown away into those communities. So not just the large scale of what's happening globally, but on the very micro scale of how communities are seen as throwaways and castaways, and are in many ways disposable. And so I think as we continue to look at how communities of color are disproportionately impacted by these issues, we also have to reconcile that a lot of it is done very deliberately, and as the representative mentioned, through legislation. And so we have to think more critically about how legislation impacts those communities as we're trying to save the planet.
The climate crisis definitely disproportionately impacts Black and brown communities all around the world, from my country, Liberia, to my community here in America, Brownsville, Brooklyn. I just want to give space to Brownsville right now because there are currently pipelines that are about to be built all throughout Brownsville, Brooklyn, which is the poorest part of Brooklyn, New York, and one of the poorest congressional districts in New York, period. And all the issues that we're seeing today concerning the climate crisis, really, Black people really bear the brunt of what's going on right now, from the pollution, the rise in elevations in terms of like polluting in our air. So it's just like, for me, as a person that comes from Brownsville, Brooklyn, which is a poor Black community, it's really disheartening to see how many people actually have not showed up for us in solidarity. So it's like, if we're going to have the conversation surrounding climate crisis, we really have to be honest about who is truly impacted the most and how can we be allies to them and show up for them. And like, my expertise is not in the climate crisis area, but what I do know as a Black person, that I will definitely suffer the repercussions of what's going on right now if people don't show up and really take a stand on how we're gonna fight against what's going on.
Climate change has been a form of education for me, like really educating myself of like what is happening. And yes, science is real and science is always right. And I feel like you just have to, one, not care, or I would just say not care to really think that things are not changing in our global community environmentally. But I do know that, like, okay, I might not see the effects of what climate change is doing to me and my family right now, but I know if we continue to go the course that we're going and have people, again, that are in power who just don't think it's real, or who have bigger fish to fry, in their words, not mine, but really just don't care about it, I know that it is going to affect me. And even if it's not affecting me now, I know that it is affecting people currently right now. And I feel like that should just be enough for people to want to make a change and try to figure out what we can do to combat climate change. So I don't know everything about it. I try to educate myself on what is happening in the world. But again, I just moved from spaces of like, okay, this is what I know, this is what I need to know, and this is what I can do to really try to be a change maker in any way possible in this conversation pertaining to climate change.
Storm, I just want to say how much I appreciate your transparency, because, I'll just say for a long time, I did not feel the green movement was for me, because Black and brown communities were disproportionately impacted, but you did not see a lot of Black and brown representation around the tables or in these rooms. That was true in many progressive spaces for a long time as well. So much, in fact, that it was not until years later where I could even attach myself to the progressive moniker, because I did not often see myself or my stories reflected in those rooms. The other thing about the climate change is sometimes I find a lot of the the verbiage intimidating, and it doesn't always feel accessible. But on the most basic level, this is, do we believe that everyone equitably deserves access to air they can breathe and water they can drink? I mean, just on the most basic level. And yes. And because of the comorbidities of structural racism, and to Jamira's point around our disproportionate rates of asthma, the food apartheid systems that we live in, transportation that is not accessible, reliable, rapid. Why does that matter? Because if our buses are just idling, it's creating carbon emissions, and that affects the environment. So all these things are connected. If we're living in subpar housing, transportation deserts, food apartheid systems, bearing the brunt of environmental injustices, unequal access to healthcare, that right there is a tsunami ecosystem that has us the most vulnerable to this pandemic and bearing the highest rates of infection, hospitalization, and of death. So climate justice is a racial justice issue. And so, Lindsay, to your point, we do have to be more intersectional in our movement building.
Going into our next topic of the economy, I mean, as we all know, like classism, elitism, economic status, all tie into all these issues as well. And twofold question, because I think that a major concern for the Gen Z audience is student debt. And I'm curious to hear y'all's thoughts on, what kind of movement that you think we'll see in this issue, or, how you think the Biden-Harris administration would address that crisis, but also just any advice that you would give to young people, as we've had a ton of young people reach out to us, as, they've, had jobs or internships promised and lost and struggling economically.
I'm a huge advocate in the economic justice sector. And what I will say, what I've been fighting for years as a person that comes from Brownsville, Brooklyn, is resources, right? Like, a lot of times people every time we bring up Black Lives Matter, the term Black on Black crime comes up, which I will argue does not exist. For just to put that out there, what exists is intraracial violence, INTRA, intraracial violence. That's what exists. And this problem is exacerbated by the fact that we do not have resources in our communities. So, to me, it is hypocrisy when you tell a community with no resources, nothing to survive, to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and work hard when they don't even have the foundation for the very boots you told them to pick themselves up by. And for me, why I am a huge proponent of the movement to reallocate resources to the communities that need it the most, in terms of initiatives like education, mental health programs, job opportunities, internships, is because I, for one, have been impacted by what it means to live in a community that has nothing. And I've seen what happens when you live in a community that's an absolute desert for every single thing that we're facing. I've lost so many friends to everyday gun violence. I see the effects of violence in our communities because we don't have anything. So when people say defund the police, we're not just saying that just to say it. We're saying that because we see in our communities that we are overly policed but underfunded. So that's in terms of how I feel in terms of the state of Black economics. I really believe that we have to reallocate the most precious resources that are given to every other system that don't need it and put it back into the communities that need it the most.
I can totally agree with Ms. Nupol. But on the Gen Z side of having student debt, I can again say that my advice towards this topic is very privileged, because I've had very different experiences that I know a lot of other young Gen Z people are not going through or will not go through. And I'm very thankful and very grateful for the position that I'm in. But having conversations with, again, my friends and my best friend, and of course you're told since you're a child that you need to go to college. You need to go to college to get a good job. You need to go to college to be in the middle class or above. You have to go to college to be where you want to be in life, essentially. But then you have to pay for that and then come out of that where you might not have your dream job, you're in debt, you are still struggling to figure out how you're going to provide as like a young person, not only for maybe the people around you, but for yourself. So like, how do you grapple that? How do you try to figure those situations out? And what I've noticed about the Joe Harris ticket is that they are trying to combat that. I don't want to get the numbers wrong, but I think they said that they are going to try to eliminate student debt if your household or your family doesn't make more than $125,000 annually, that 2-year public college will be free. Like, I think it's essential in order for you to tell these young people that they have to do something or they have to get this education, which I believe. I mean, I don't think college is for everybody, but like, if you want to do certain things in life, that yes, you need to go to an institution or a university to get that education. But like, how do you feel good about doing that when you have this thing or this cloud hanging over your head? Like, okay, yes, I'm doing this to advance, but I'm also taking multiple steps back because I don't have the resources. I don't have the resources to be able to succeed like the world or society is telling me to succeed. I don't know if any of that made sense. I feel like I'm spitballing, but it's really about resources. And I feel like Joe and Kamala are trying to make effort into combating that. Like, of course, they can't fix everything. We talked about that earlier in this conversation, but they are trying to take steps to where it'll be easier for the economy, but for young people who are trying to do good. Like, this generation is going to become our next doctors, lawyers, judges. Like, these young people are going to become the powerhouses in the world, the people who make laws and make decisions. So why won't we, or why can't we make it easier on them?
Yeah, I have to say, I'm happy Nupol went first because I would not want Storm to call me Miss Jamira. I'm definitely so old in this moment. But I'm happy we're talking about economics because, you know, since Nupol dropped Brooklyn, I'm going to have to say, as a native of Philadelphia, you know, I grew up in the aftermath of the crack epidemic and the war on drugs. And as the first of my family with 16 siblings that went to college and graduated, we constantly talk about generational wealth, but we never talk about generational debt and the implications it has for generations of Black and brown folks who never were given the opportunity to reach their full potential because there weren't institutions in place that enable for them to go to college, to get a good job, to pay back debt, and to invest in their families. And so I think about the fact that at this moment, we have to look at how institutions previously have been used to weaponize against the development of individuals' growth, to be able to build generational debt, to be able to invest in their families and communities. And to Nupol's point, you know, we're not just talking about defund the police or defund the military in this arbitrary way. We're saying if we're spending billions of dollars to resolve crime, right? And we can talk about whether or not that's true or not. Why can't we spend that amount of money to be preventative, to invest in mental health, to invest in education, to ensure people have a pipeline to education versus a pipeline to prison? And so I think we really need to look at how communities have been seen as a desert for resources for so long, not just to impact families like mine, but also families who at this moment were once middle class, but all you had to have was an incident like COVID-19, and they're now standing in the pantry lines because the American dream only really is possible for a very small percentage of people in this country, and not for the average person who's just trying to survive and feed their families while also trying to find some level of joy while working at a job that they may or may not love.
Co-sign in so many thoughts. I mean, you know, I believe fiercely that we need a federal jobs guarantee. We need to raise, people need to be working at a living wage. And to your point, Jamira, everything that you enumerated there is, you know, what I characterize as policy violence. That policy violence obstructed our ability to build generational wealth. So Black student borrowers borrow more than any other group, and we default more than any other group. And are you also there? You seem frozen. Okay. Nupol was frozen. And so the average borrower is saddled with about $30,000 worth of debt. And so Representative Omar and I have introduced legislation just to cancel it. I mean, I can't believe that in the midst of this pandemic, do you know that they've been garnishing people, if you are still employed, your wages and your benefits, this administration, 54,000 people at least, before we intervened and made them stop. If you weren't paying your loan and you were defaulting, they were garnishing wages and benefits in the midst of a pandemic. In my state, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which I serve in I represent the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District in our state, we have teachers who have lost their licensure to teach because they've defaulted on loans that they earned because they wanted to be educators. So this is a $1.6 trillion crisis. It is choking at the promise of our communities because it is directly impacting what life decisions people aren't pursuing their dreams. They're not even honoring their gifts because they are so saddled with this debt. If we cancel student debt, acknowledging that the average borrower has $30,000 worth of debt, we can jumpstart the economy. So personally, I believe that an equitable economic recovery from this pandemic, canceling student debt must be a part of that. And it is really a credit to the organizers and the activists. This has been a movement for a long time. Now it's a part of the national discourse. And the fact that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris can name student debt, that they are committed to canceling, any parts of it, is a step in the right direction. It's a racial justice issue. Student debt is a racial justice issue because Black and brown students disproportionately have the highest debt and default. Mm-hmm. And then that affects your credit report.
That was deliberately done once more Black and brown folks started to get access to schools.
Absolutely.
That's for another conversation.
Predatory products and, folks setting people up to fail. Yep. Knowing that they will default. So we could go down a rabbit hole on that, but Lindsay, just glad that you asked the question and grateful that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have named that issue and do have a plan to address it. It is a racial justice issue and it's critical to an equitable economic recovery from this pandemic.
No, I'm super grateful to have this conversation with all of you. I mean, these are issues that affect us all as Black women and that we're all super passionate about and excited to see that Biden-Harris ticket tackle some of these things. And I'm so grateful for all of your time. Thank you, Representative Pressley. Thank you, Nupol. Thank you, Jamira. Thank you, Storm. Admire each and every one of you and I really appreciate that you took the time today to talk over all of these things.
Appreciate all of you. Jamira, next time you got to get those resistant hoops on. We all have our resistance hoops.
I know. I'm coming, but you see the sweater?
You are repping. You are repping with the statement. Yes. I appreciate it.
Yes.
We in this together.
Shout out to Ayanna, Storm, Jamira.
Yeah, so much love.
Love all you guys. You guys are all an inspiration to me.
Likewise. It's such a pleasure. Some of my girl crushes are in one place.
We love you, sis. Thank you. Great.
Thank you all.